Um,
Shall I?
yeah, let's do this. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay. Hey, welcome everyone. This is Sales Growth for Startups, scaling past your first customer. So hopefully you're in the right place. I am Bob Graham. I'm co-founder of a company called Renegade Success Network. We help entrepreneurs and business leaders figure out their next step on their path to discovery and growth. With me today, and the focus, the spotlight person, is Brendan Mcadams, who is the founder of Kinetics, and that's Kinetics with two I's. Yes, that's not a typo. It's a sales coaching agency, and he's co-founder of expertscape.com, a web resource that identifies and objectively ranks medical expertise by specific topic. He is the author of Salescraft, a great book, and he's working on his next book on sales freelancing. I know he gets closer every week because we talk about it every week. In addition to all that, Brendan consults with numerous startups on sales, and he has channeled that passion into helping founders shift from building their great solution to selling that solution, a really important shift. Brendan leads a membership group focused on helping founders find success in selling. And on a more personal note, Brendan is a valued friend and business associate to me. He's a talented chef. I was at his house on Friday. We were doing a little planning meeting. He cooked up a beautiful appetizer, and he also is a connoisseur of beverages. I won't go into those beverages. Let's just say it was a Friday happy hour specific kind of thing. Okay. He's also an amateur machinist and woodworker in his spare time. And my hope is that all of these talents are going to play a role in our discussion. So let's get started. Brendan, you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking your time this afternoon to kind of listen in, and I hope we can make this rather interactive. I've got a few slides, or we've got a few slides to kind of go through on some key topics, and the idea behind them is, in the conversations I have with a lot of my founder customers, and in my past sales consulting to startups and around sales and marketing strategy, I find that getting your first customer and then getting past your first customer is a rather significant hurdle for a lot of companies. And so we thought we'd spend some time kind of digging into what those are and how you might think about them. And so today, what I thought is we'd spend a few minutes talking about the sales challenges, where you may find yourself now in terms of your sales process and your customer acquisition process, or your state, if you will, where you want to take that, where you want to take the company, and where you want to take your sales efforts, and then finally, how do you go about getting there? And so, like I said, let's try and keep this rather interactive and engaged. And if we have questions as we go along, let's
throw them in the chat if you would. We'd love to see them in the chat. We can get them into the discussion. That would be great. I'll keep track of that. If there's something that you want Brendan to tell you more about, just say, hey, I go a little deeper on that, or if there's something else. So Brendan, why don't we talk about some of those challenges? You work with all kinds of founders who tend to focus on their product primarily. I mean, I've started two companies. When I was starting my company, I was worried about how am I going to get this thing out into the world, and that thing was all that mattered. I wasn't thinking about who that customer would be to the level that I probably should have or could have. What are you observing in that world?
That's yeah, and that's an excellent point. And so before we kind of tackle the idea of, or tackle the objective of getting new sales, let's first spend a few minutes just kind of talking about some of the conflicts and challenges that are in the way. And they fall into a couple different categories. One is certainly just the general, your own personal conflicts in terms of, as a founder, as a solopreneur, what have you. It's that, as you talked about, do you spend your time building and creating, or do you spend your time sorry, I have to do this admitting thing. Do you spend your time building or or do you spend your time selling? And if you're like most founders that I talk to, they would much rather spend their time building the thing and doing the internal work than they do want to spend than they want to spend actively selling. And so how do you go about tackling that issue? And then so there's that. Then there's their own demands of the customer. Customer demands that you may have, like what they expect of you, and then the demands of the business, whether it's building, whether it's raising money and so forth. Those are things you got to wrestle with. And then the other kind of general challenge is this, what I would call, for lack of a better term, sales phobia. And that is like the fear of sales, the disinterest in doing sales, or the discomfort in doing sales. And these are all things you're going to have to confront at some level or another. So and then kind of a related thing would be, do you have sales help? Who do we need to
I
mute?
think you may need to mute the last person you let in, perhaps. But I don't see it either. So Brendan, let me ask you a question, if I may.
Yeah.
We're talking through these challenges. What's the biggest one you see that really gets in the way?
Oh, excellent point, and excellent question. What I see mostly, in most cases, it's people either putting off sales until the product is complete and finished,
and perfect, right?
Perfect, right? Exactly. Or they don't want to sell because they feel like that product that they're building and have built is good enough that they can just put up a landing page and people will come to it and buy it simply on the merits of the product itself. And that just seldom occurs, and most of the, because there are plenty of choices out here. We're actually living in what I would consider a Cambrian explosion of new services and new solutions out there. It's just amazing what's coming out in the market, literally on a daily basis. And so there's always a new thing. And so sales is becoming incredibly important if you've got something that you build that you want to sell. If you're a hobbyist and you like to build things for the sake of building them, that's okay. But if you really want to be a business person, if you want to turn this into a business, you have to figure out how to sell.
And then I see on your slide here, Brendan, that you have sales phobias, the fear, disinterest, discomfort. Which one of those do you see most often taking a role in a founder's success or lack of success?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it's any one of those things. It's in fact, in some cases, like a combination of one or more, of more than one. And that is, that there's oftentimes a fear of rejection. You don't like to talk to people and then have them say no. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit. They don't find it engaging in the same way that building or the other aspects of running a company or starting a company are engaging. And that's an educational challenge. And then there's a discomfort going back to, combined with the fear. There's the discomfort in having to talk to people and having to ask them to buy. And in a lot of cases, that's because they think it's somehow sleazy, or they're trying to fool someone or cajole someone into buying something, while really a real sales process is one of kind of a mutual qualification to figure out if what you've built is what they need, and if what they want is something you want to support.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a different way of looking at it than most people. I think most of the founders I talk to, they're thinking about, I've got to go out and sell. I mean, you can hear it.
Yeah.
I have no choice but I have to sell. I have to go to this conference and sell. And I think what you're articulating, if I understand correctly, is it's not so much I have to do a sale. It's I want to see where the marriage is, or if there even is a marriage between what I've built and what that potential customer needs. Am I getting that clear?
Yeah, that's right. And it's really, at the final analysis, sales is really just helping someone make a decision. And in the sales process, you're actually going through your own evaluation about whether or not you want someone as a customer. I mean, that's just as important as to whether or not they want you as a vendor, is because if you're in the startup world in particular, this is critically important when you're in the early stages of a company development. And that is, you want to have the right customers on board, customers they're going to help you succeed, they're going to be flexible given the fact that it's an early stage product in particular. They're going to help market. They want to see you succeed because they're banking on this. They're willing to pay money. All these sorts of things are critically important criteria for you to evaluate when you look at a potential customer. And this kind of gets to a topic that we're going to cover a little bit later, and that is the whole mindset of how you go about thinking about the sales process. And if you have the right mindset, then selling is not something to be fearful of or disinterested in. It's a way to engage and learn and ultimately help someone. If you're building products, you're doing it. You may be doing it to make money, but it's at some fundamental level, you've got to think of it in terms of being able to help people. And if your products actually help people do something, then you're just helping them along the way if they end up being a customer.
I love that, Brendan. Folks, if Brendan's making sense to you, put a Y in the chat box. Let's show Brendan we're paying attention here. We got a whole lot going on. I know I do a lot of speaking, and I love to see Y's in the chat box because it shows me that people are actually awake and engaged. Thank you, Evelyn. There you go, Brendan. Thank you, Studley August. This is awesome. There you go. See how that inspires him?
No. Well, thank you. And so now, the next question is all right. So now we've kind of covered some of the psychology of sales, for early stage founders. Now the next thing is, if you're going to go after and start looking to grow your business, the first question that I would have for you, and what I typically talk to customers about when I coach them or when I work with them on a consulting basis is, do you have customers now? Do you have one customer? Do you have multiple customers? If you don't have customers, why not? Is it because where you are in the stage? Are you actively talking to them? If you're not talking to them, why aren't you? We need to know that. We really need to know that, because it's critically important to be talking to people before the product is out in the market and available. You want to be validating essentially all the way along. You also want to be using those conversations to set levels of expectation and enthusiasm and a certain level of anticipation that when the product does come out, they're ready to buy.
So Brendan, what you're suggesting, if I'm not mistaken, is that the building and the selling process in some ways need to be running concurrently and collaboratively, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so ideally, you're talking to potential customers and saying, hey, if we do this, how would you feel about that? If we do that, how much would you pay for that? And that's informing your decisions on how you're building this solution, so that ideally, if you're talking to the right people, you're going to be able to sell to more people because you brought the feedback in throughout the process. I think that's different than most people think about these things. I think most people think about it as, I'm going to build this thing and then I'm going to sell it. And it's so amazing because no one's ever done what I did, because I'm Bob and I'm amazing, that they're just going to all buy it.
Yeah. And that's not how people buy. It's not how people on this call buy. Typically, it's really about them, and it's about their own criteria. And they have a lot of choice, and only more choice these days. So you really need to go to your customer. You need to figure out what the drivers are. And that's kind of where we're going to go with this next conversation.
Brendan, can I interrupt you with a question from Tim?
Yeah, fire away.
Are there companies that startups can hire to find niche markets that the startup otherwise would not be privy to? Or is that what market research firms already do? That's a great question.
Yeah, it is. And, and it's, yeah, I'm sure I'm sure there are companies out there that kind of can help you with some of that market research. Um, it really is going to depend on so many criteria, but I guess one of the first criteria is how many customers you need to have to get started. And if you need to have one or two or three, if you're a B2B kind of customer, then you can probably do it by hand, one at a time. And we'll talk about that here in a second. If you're a B2C kind of a company and you're out looking for the consumer market at a more of a mass scale, then yes, absolutely, you're going to want to do some much different kinds of levels of market research and identify certain personas of buyers and look at. There's a lot more math and statistics and A/B testing and so forth that needs to happen in a B2C market than does in a B2B market. So I guess my first question back to Tim would be: is he focused on like what size customer does he need to start to get going, or to keep going? And is that customer in the B2C marketplace, or is it business to business as opposed to business to consumer?
Now, Brendan, I know you do a lot of calls with people, just helping them with things. That sounds like the kind of thing where if Tim wants to go a little deeper, he could
Yeah.
set up a call
Yeah.
with you, right?
Yeah, and I do those. You can go to the website and you can book a free consult. It's happy to do it. I love talking to people about this stuff. So if that makes sense, by all means, just when you go to Kinetics, there's a button you can book a 30-minute call with me.
And I can tell you, I've sent people to Brendan, and he is a wealth of information, and no one has ever said to me, that was a complete waste of time. Usually it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not much good when it comes to B2C. So if you've got B2C sorts of questions, I'm going to be of limited value there because it's such a different beast. But if it's B2B, selling in enterprises, selling SaaS into a business to business kind of environment, then or a large enterprise, then I've got a lot of kind of experience to draw from. So now we're at that point. Where do you want to go? So you've got a customer, or you're getting ready to get a customer, and you need to start to think about, oh, did we skip ahead? Oh yeah, we did. Where are you now? Do you have a customer? Are they a paying customer? These are kind of the questions we need to know the answers to. What's the status of that customer? Are they in production? Are they happy? Are they getting into, where are they in the process? What's the level of integration? How many people are using it inside the company? And then this is the most important question: what do you know about them as a customer? What do you know about the kind of value that your customer is deriving from the product? And that is, what's the return on investment? Are they able to increase revenue? Are they able to reduce some costs? Are they gaining market share? Do they have a greater competitive advantage? And most importantly to that, are you able to quantify those in a meaningful way? Number one. And are those numbers meaningful in themselves? And that is, it costs X to buy your product and they get a 3 or 4X return. That's meaningful. If it costs X to buy your product and they get an X.1%, return, then you might have an issue. You have an issue. So those are the
and also being able to quantify that, right, Brendan?
Right. You want to know
that's
those.
what the customer wants, to be taken from some place to a better place. And if you can't articulate that, because I've seen that with some founders where it's like, well, this is an amazing tool.
Yeah.
And the person's like, I don't understand where this fits into what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And they need to be able to justify the purchase and the risk associated with moving from where they are today to where they're going. And to do that, you need to be able to give them some meaningful gain that's worth them taking that risk. And so to kind of, to go back and kind of talk a little bit about general sales from the standpoint of from the customer perspective, you're taking them on a journey. They're in a place. You want to take them with your product, your solution, your service to a better place. And in between that to get there, there is a journey, and that journey has some level of risk. They're doing something new. It's a behavior change. And so you need to be able to address those things, and knowing enough about what value your product derives from from them choosing it is meaningful. And that first customer you have, those first couple customers you have, can be invaluable in that regard, to be able to learn the sorts of things you need to know to be able to articulate going forward to your next prospective customer. If you buy from me, if we work together, it's going to cost X, and you're going to get 3X value. You're going to get 4X back. And here's how you're going to do it. And here who else has done it. And ideally, they'll speak to your prospective customer about their experience. So
You mitigate that risk a little bit by developing trust.
Yeah.
Which is using the language of your customer,
right,
understanding your customer,
yep,
all those things. So it's not the way you said it with the risk. I kind of got startled by that idea of risk. There is a risk, of course, when we make a change. But if you trust the person, that risk is much less.
Right.
Or it can be managed. I'm not walking alone. The person selling me this product is there every step of the way to hold my hand when I get scared or when it's not working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. And I have a whole other long talk about this that I've done with, I did a couple of weeks ago with Hello Meats and the Twitter community. And I could make that available too, or we could talk about that at some point. But yeah, that's a whole other kind of component that's really invaluable to the sales process. But where you are now, the rest of this is, one of the things is now you've got a customer, you've got a few early customers, and the questions you need to ask yourself are, do you like this customer? Do you like the space that you're in? Do you like the industry? Do you like the specific niche? Are these things that, going back to the question of return on investment, if it turns out that your product costs X and the customer only gets a 1.1X return, then, that's an industry or a niche or a customer that's not going to get value out of your product. And you need to really rethink whether or not that's where you want to be, or are there features that need to take place that you need to add, or functionality to raise that return on investment enough that to make customers want to purchase, et cetera, et cetera. And so before you go out and start attacking the market to grow your customer base, and I'm not suggesting you delay in any way for any period of time to do this analysis. This should happen rather quickly, but you want to ask yourself, do you like the sorts of customers you're accruing? And are they in the industry and in a niche that you feel warrants pursuing this business further? And once you know that, we get to the next step, which is, where do you want to go? So you either want to stay in that niche, you want to stay in that industry, you want to stay with those sorts of customers, or you want to migrate elsewhere. And so when you decide you want to migrate elsewhere to a different market or stay in that market, there are some questions that are in some kind of issues to focus on.
Can I ask you a question about this, Brendan? If
I
am a founder, I got a startup, I have no customers.
Yeah.
I've got this really great service or product, doesn't matter. How can I find my ideal customer if I don't really know who's going to buy it? I just know this is a really cool, novel way to do something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess the first question you'd have to ask is, what sort of problem does it solve, right? If the problem solves what exactly is the problem that it solves in specific detail, and then can you imagine who it solves that problem for? Like, if you've developed some whiz bang video editor, then the question would become, who uses video, or who should be using video, and how are they doing it today? and can you, how much better can you make that video experience? And, and then, and then if you can figure out in some way how to, again, going back to the comment with the conversation we just had, can you quantify how much you can improve that experience? And even if in the beginning, before you've got a first customer, can you estimate it? Can you do a rough order of magnitude and figure out that, listen, we've tested this, we've looked at this, and we can reduce your effort to generate video by 50%. And what then the question becomes, what's that time worth? How much is a 50% improvement on your ability to generate video and edit or do whatever? How much does that save you in terms of time? And now you can put a price on that, and you can approach people that use video. It would be one example.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah. And so there are, and then I guess one of the things I would say, it's a good question, because there are a lot of kind of ways you could go about it. You could start to talk to people in all sorts of realms and say, hey, I built this tool, I built this thing, and it does this. Who would use this? And ask the question, ask people, like, who do you think would use it? And they may very well come up with some ideas that you don't. One of the reasons why when I have these consulting engagements with people or do some coaching, one of the things that I kind of bring to the table, and anyone, and everyone listening in here can bring to the table, is you come to problems with a new perspective. And that new perspective is invaluable to someone, because you can come in and see something from a different angle that they may not have seen, because your experiences are different and so forth. And so you want to talk to, in the course of doing this kind of discovery work, you want to figure out what other people might think of that product, and what kind of feedback, what kind of ideas might they come up with. That doesn't mean that you want to pursue them. You then have to evaluate them, but you at least can take those into account along with your own ideas about where the product should go, or who might use it.
Can I fire another question?
Sure.
At you, Brendan?
Yeah.
When I was teaching at Johns Hopkins University here in Baltimore a couple of years ago, I was dealing with a lot of entrepreneurial students, both undergraduate and graduate.
Yep.
And they were creating really great solutions to really complex problems, medical problems, social problems. But they were really good at creating the solution. They were not really articulate in explaining how that solution fit in. They had that, I assume that people will figure it out, or everyone has the same knowledge base as me. Have you run into that? And what would you say to that?
Yeah. And that's kind of the next bullet, which is a kind of a nice segue. And that is, when you get to know your ideal customer, you want to be able to speak to them in language that's very specific, compelling, and digestible by them in their world. So one of the things we talk about language here is that different industries have different terminology and different phrases and different metrics. And to the degree that what niche your product is meant to solve, or what niche it works in, is, to the degree you can speak in that language and use those metrics effectively, is going to do a couple things for you. It's going to explain to your customer, or communicate to your customer instantly that, oh, you understand the space. You understand the space they're in and their problem, because you're speaking more or less in my language, and you're talking about things that are important to me. That's critically important. And then I guess one of the things I would say is, and what I find works with customers, is put it into a format that's really simple. I do blank, or my product is this, to do something, some action for you by doing something. And you fill in those blanks, like my product reduces the time it takes to edit video by X% using by 3X, or 3 times, and saving you X amount of money by doing by this feature and this feature or this thing. And if you can put that language into into a sentence that just very crisply says, I do this, and here's how I do it, and this is the result. This is the benefit you get, the very specific measurable benefit. That formula is used over and over and over again. And that resonates with people. So this goes to the idea of that specific compelling value proposition.
Right.
If you can speak to it in very specific, meaningful terms that the customer understands, that's going to help you identify and qualify that, oh, I'm talking to the right person. They get it. This is interesting to them. And then a whole bunch of questions are going to come out of that.
If I can, Brendan, let me put a little finer point on that. I have a handful of customers or my clients. Some of them refer to the people that buy from them as customers.
Yep.
Some refer to them as clients.
Yep.
I have someone in a dojo who talks about their members. I have someone else in the government space who talks about constituents.
Yep.
I have someone else who talks about donors. And each one of those, when I'm talking to them, if I say to the library person, your customers, she's looking at me like, we don't have customers.
Yeah.
They're not exchanging money with us. That's not the right terminology. And you may say, I know I have people say to me all the time, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And I would say, as simple as that little thing, it's huge to building that trust. That if you don't even know what I call my customers, how can I trust you to solve a really complicated problem?
Yeah, that's my specialty is in healthcare technology over the years has been, and Medicare talks to their members as beneficiaries. And so when you talk to Medicare, the CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the phrase they use for their customers is beneficiaries. When you talk to insurance companies, they talk about doctors as providers. But when you talk to doctors, they hate being called providers because they're not providers, they're doctors. And so where you are and what you're able to communicate, when you talk to a doctor and call him a provider or her a provider, you're not speaking to them in terms that resonate favorably. And so that sort of stuff happens over and over again. And so those are the sorts of things that you really need to they can help you in terms of getting you to where you need to go. So just the next question is, how do you get there? And so we've been kind of talking about this a little bit, or a fair amount actually. And I have like 3 different things that I kind of talk to my customers and my clients about. And that is, the first is you get there by having a mindset. And we've talked about this a little bit. And that is, it's very important as a founder, as a startup entrepreneur, you have to have the right mindset. And that mindset is, I'm helping people. I'm looking to find people to help. And if you adopt that sort of mindset and and then go through a discovery process with people that looks to qualify them as people your product can help or not help. And if you think of it that way, then it's really not sales anymore in the same sense. You're talking to someone, you're on the phone, here's what I do. If you like, I'd like to hear about what some of your challenges are, how you go about it in this area. And I'm just trying to see if I can be of help, if my product and my solution can be of help. And if it can, then we'll keep talking. And if it can't, it's great. And maybe I'll even refer you to somebody else. And if
you're not using a script, Brendan?
No, you don't.
Do you advocate using a script?
No, to each his own or her own, but I think of a script as if you use a script in a way to kind of remind you of the sorts of topics you want to cover, then it's a very useful tool. And and over time, as you practice and you have more and more of these conversations, and I suggest you have a lot of them, as you have those conversations, this stuff becomes second nature. And so the script is just sort of a way to kind of remind you. It's a bit of a checklist of things to cover. But a script to go through as a way to read through a document to get to a place is going to make you sound inauthentic. It's going to make you, the conversation is going to be stilted. It's going to put you at a disadvantage if they ask you a question out of order or something you hadn't anticipated. And so I think over the long haul, really the script is something that just goes away. And so I would suggest you have some idea of the sorts of things you're going to talk about. And I go back to mindset. If you think about this as I'm having a conversation to see if I can help someone, then it doesn't have to be a script. It's not a sales pitch, because you're not, the whole dynamic has changed. So
I like that.
Yeah. And then it's critically important, and it changes the whole, it opens up your whole approach in a way that I think helps founders in particular who are looking at sales in a way that probably just traditionally is not helpful to them. And this is, if you have this mindset, I think it just opens things up for you.
Well, the old model of sales seems not to work as well now.
Yeah.
You can't just knock on every door in the neighborhood and say, I'm selling brushes.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is especially
you
true.
move past that, because I'll buy a brush from you if you tell me, Brendan, hey, this is a great brush.
Yeah.
But if someone comes to my door and says I have a great brush,
yeah,
I may not need to paint.
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
What's the use of having a brush?
Yeah. Right. And so, yeah. And so if you can kind of get to that point, you're really doing your own qualification. So then the next thing is, how do you get there? I would say you have to take this in a holistic approach. And that is this, I'm not suggesting that you just quit doing everything and focus on sales. That's not the point. You still have to do product development. You still have to do marketing, and you still have to do sales. But the thing is, if they really do complement each other, because early on, your sales conversations are really product discovery conversations as much as they are sales discussions. And because they're going to help you to further define the product, that they're going to help you define who your ideal customers are, and that helps you with marketing and so forth. And so in that regard, if you think of sales as just the other side of the coin from marketing, and if it's a three-sided coin and it's product development if you can imagine such a thing, then that's kind of the relationship. A three-legged stool might be a better way to think of it. You've got product development, you've got marketing, and you've got sales, and they're really all quite complementary and to one another. But I will say that that early on, for most customers, you're going to want to, for most startups, especially B2B startups, you want customer acquisition essentially one at a time. And that is, you want to go out, talk to people, see who fits, and then work with them one at a time. You may want to work with several at the same time, but you're having conversations one-on-one. And that's the difference between sales and marketing in particular. Is marketing is not a conversation. Marketing is a broadcast,
messaging, right?
It's a broadcast. Whereas sales is a conversation, and you can't sell in a broadcast. You're just communicating. Maybe you're educating, but you're not learning. And in sales, you're really learning. It's a very much an interactive thing, and there are advantages to that are really important, especially to founders, and that is the speed of things happening. You have the control over the speed which things happen. You get to be selective about who you choose as customers, and I think that's incredibly important. Going back to the mindset, you get to choose your customers. They choose you, of course, but you choose them just as much. Do I want to work with them? You don't have to. You're not compelled to. And and they also sales gives you pricing flexibility that marketing does not. You can be very price flexible when you're dealing one-on-one with customers. And in the course of these conversations, you're going to very often find with your sales efforts that you can charge more, because you discover in the course of the conversation that the value is greater. If someone's getting 10x from the value of your product, then maybe you're charging not enough. Maybe you should be charging so that it's 5x, or you need to prepare for the day where your prices show that you're charging, 2x of the value, or, twice as much. And if those numbers are posted on your website as marketing numbers, then you're handcuffing yourself.
Brendan, when we talk about pricing,
Yeah.
do you believe in offering the product or service free to the first 2, 3, 5 people just to get some customers, just to get some feedback? Does that work? Or is that detrimental in some way?
It's not, it's really very situational, but if you're dealing with a particularly motivated customer that's small and cost constrained, or they have they're in an early startup stage or whatever, you may choose to do something for free. But in most cases, in almost all cases, for proof of concepts and pilots and early stages, you really want customers that are going to pay something. Maybe they don't pay the full amount. Maybe they don't pay during the beta, but they do pay with the understanding that when they get out of the beta process, they're paying. But I think you want paying customers, because paying customers are confirmation of a value for the product that you're delivering or the solution that you're delivering. And if someone isn't willing to pay, then what they're saying is, I'll do this, but I don't see value in it, or I'm not willing to assign a value to it. And the minute someone becomes a paying customer, A, you're in a business and you're not a hobbyist, and B, you've got a real confirmation that you've accomplished something. And those are critically important. And they, you know what? And they're really important for your mindset. If you know that you've got a paying customer, you're getting a check, and you're getting rewarded for the effort, that's important psychic energy.
I like it, psychic energy.
Yeah.
So Brendan, when you move down on this slide to how you get there, you talk about momentum. Walk us through that, about how to maintain momentum.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, you want to, as I mentioned this first note, you want to leverage your progress. You've gotten progress. You've got a customer. You maybe got more than one. How do you keep those moving forward? What can you do to keep those customers moving forward towards a favorable outcome? And part of that is you maybe you look for references. Are they happy? Can they recommend a customer? Can they, like someone who's not competitive or is, or not in their market, for example? Like if you're in the educational market, for example, and you're selling to school systems, then you could go to the school system and say, hey, can you recommend, who else should we talk to? What other schools? Because they all know each other and they don't compete. I mean, one elementary school or high school doesn't really compete with another, at least not, not in an educational sense. It's very easy in that environment, for example, to ask one customer, say, hey, could you refer me to some of your friends in, or people that might benefit from this in another school system. Now, you may not have the same success if you're in some really hyper competitive world, but if you're you're selling to dry cleaners, they probably don't compete. They compete with the dry cleaner down the street, perhaps, but they don't compete with dry cleaners, in the next county over, and they all go to the same conferences and they know each other. And at some level, many of your customers will want to tell others, oh, I bought this system. It's really great. It makes them feel smart. I picked a good vendor. I'm saving a lot of money. It makes me look like a smart business person if I chose.
Or you can charge for the exclusivity, right?
Well, yeah, that's another option, but then that limits your market. That
Right.
in a lot of cases, that's one of the things I would talk to customer about startups about what their strategy should be around exclusivity and things like that. Most favored nations, those sorts of pricing
Right.
things.
And those are really important considerations that I think most startups, one, aren't prepared for, and two, don't have the inherent expertise. I think that's where you provide a great service, Brendan, in terms of helping them look at the parts of the process
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they may not
That's
be
right.
thinking through with that eye towards sales, which ultimately is the name of the game.
Yeah.
If you don't have sales, you're not really in business.
Yeah. Right. That's right. You're a hobbyist is the way I would describe
Yeah,
it. Not that
yeah.
that's a bad thing, but
Which is fine if you want to be.
yeah.
I mean, that's
Right.
beautiful.
Right. So then in terms of other, finding customers, who have you talked to in the past? So again, I go back to, it's critically important when you're a startup phase, talk to as many people as you can about your product or your solution. And then keep track of them, because some people are going to want to, they're going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to talk to you again. And maybe they weren't interested before, but maybe they are now because you've added a new feature or their circumstances have changed, whatever. Keep talking to people. And then ask yourself, where do your customers congregate? I mentioned dry cleaners, they do trade shows. There are local associations. Maybe you could speak at one of those. There are lots of ways, especially in this day and age, you can find them on Twitter. Now, I'm sure there's a Twitter thread or a LinkedIn thread for dry cleaners or for people that do video. I mean, you're literally one search away, and you could start to have conversations with people that way. And so there's a lot of ways to kind of keep that sales engine kind of moving. And then
That's great, Brendan.
go ahead.
I love it. And you didn't mention it, but you were actually teaching some people over the last couple of weeks how to use some of these tools a little more effectively. I was able to sit in on a couple of classes where you were helping people leverage Twitter as founders and startups. And it was really cool stuff that wasn't rocket science in the sense that you need to hire a giant company to do it. It was stuff that you could do in a half hour, 20 minutes.
And it's a great, Twitter is turning out to be, there's a real, I don't know if resurgence is the right word, but it's definitely taking on a much more serious business impact. It's having a much greater influence on business, and a lot more people seem to be on Twitter, and it's turning out to be a great place to do market research, to have customer conversations, to get on podcasts, to get guests blog, to generate content and to get people to follow you and be aware of you. And so some of these social media things are incredibly valuable and inexpensive and very quick. I'm finding Twitter is particularly responsive. You can learn a tremendous amount about your market, potential customers in a matter of literally hours or days instead of weeks and so forth at very low cost. So, and the last thing I would say about momentum here as we kind of wrap up in the next few minutes is that part of the momentum is can you can you make fewer mistakes, and are you able to do things more quickly and thus speed up that process to acquiring your next customer. And that kind of gets us to the next kind of comment, which is, what is your next step? And from a sales standpoint, in terms of getting customer acquisition, this is it's critically important in the early stages. I talk to customers and founders all the time, and if you're struggling with acquiring new customers, you're not alone. It is not easy to do, and you can certainly do it. You can figure it out on your own, but it's critically important that you try and get that you get some momentum and try and make as few mistakes as you can. But you're going to make mistakes, and the other way to do it is to work with somebody on a coaching basis to kind of move faster, make fewer mistakes, and get better results. And
also, Brendan, to get customized solutions, because to figure it out on your own way is to read books and watch YouTube videos. And I've watched many of those over the years. It's a one size fits all. Here's the script for every sales situation. Yeah. What you do with people is a real customized situation. What are you trying to do? Who's your ideal customer? What are your strengths? Do you like to go meet with people at meetings, or are you someone who wants to do podcasts, and really
Yeah.
tailoring that? And I
Yeah.
think that's really part of when you talk about getting help. That to me is part of the magic, that it's not just a one size fits all with you. You really look at each individual situation and sort it out. And you can't do that with video or books.
Yeah, that's nice of you to say, Bob. I appreciate that. And I guess what I would say is that one of the things that I think is encouraging about being an entrepreneur and being a startup, or being an indie hacker or creator, is that there's no one right way. There are a number of different avenues you can take. There are a number of different strategies that work equally well. And it's not that hard to find a strategy that complements your own style and capabilities. But the one thing I will say is, in my experience talking to founders and working with them and working with startups for like the last decade, is that people can get better at sales. Sales is not it's not a genetic skill. It's completely learnable. And everyone does it. Everyone does some level of sales. And they oftentimes, one of the things I find is people talk about it, like when you talk to them about it for any length of time, they realize, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was selling in that instance. And yet people are doing it all the time. There are a bunch of fundamentals and techniques that can make it easier for you. And this is especially true for people that are kind of technical, because they're process driven, they're meticulous oftentimes, they're detail oriented, and sales lends itself to people that can do things consistently and with a certain precision. And I don't think a lot of founders realize that. And so that's one of the things I spend a lot of time with them, is kind of getting them to kind of work on this and this and this, and then they realize that, this is not hard. This is just, it's a discipline.
One of the other things, Brendan, you and I have had the chance to talk. We used to go to breakfast when we could be together every couple of weeks, even more frequently. And one thing you talked to me about is the whole idea that people who are creating something, the builder part of them believes that they should be naturally good at the sales part.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fallacy that you've explained in the last 52 minutes.
Yeah.
It's okay not to be great at sales. But recognizing, hey, there's some area for me to cover here. How do I want to move forward and get there? Do I want to go the quick way and get help, or do I want to take the slow route?
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know, and I'm sure there's no real research on it, but how many businesses had great business ideas, but they struggled with that sales component. And so it ended up just being, they burned through whatever money or time or capital they had.
Yeah.
And it went away.
Well, the one thing I read about, it seems to be one fact that statistic, if you will, that shows up over and over again, is that 9 out of 10 startups fail. And I don't know if that number is exactly right or not, but I mean, anecdotally, that's pretty consistent with what I've seen over my career. And they typically fail for one of two reasons. Overwhelmingly fail because they run out of revenue, which is they run out of runway. They can no longer pay their bills and so forth, or they fail to deliver on their customer obligations. They don't deliver the product or the solution that the customer expects, and then ultimately the customer abandons them and goes elsewhere. And those are both sales problems, and they're both addressable. And so through a number of things we've talked about over the last 50 some minutes, and other kind of fundamental things that can really make a huge difference. And so it's not to say that you could eliminate entirely that failure rate, but for companies that are able to execute well on sales in those two areas, in terms of generating revenue and then meeting the customer where the customer is effectively, those two areas, sales can dramatically improve the likelihood of success. And especially That's especially important during the early stages when things are ill-defined and you're in that nascent stage of the company. So
Brendan,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, if people have questions, this would be a great time. We've only got a couple more minutes. I want to ask you one question though, Brendan, and great.
Sure.
I was going to say, please put up your
Yeah.
contact information. I know people are going to want to go there.
Yeah.
My question to you is, if I'm a founder, would you recommend in the early phases that I hire a salesperson who's really good at sales to come in and do sales because I don't want to deal with that? Or is it wiser for me to do the early sales so I really understand what's going on? So when I do hire that salesperson, I know what the heck's going on.
Yeah, thank you. That's an incredibly important question because, and it's maybe not the answer that that people want to hear, but no, I'm a sales guy. And I would say when you're in the early stages of the company, you do not want to sell right away. You do not want to hire a salesperson right away because as a founder, you need to there are so many advantages to being decent, to being effective at sales. You don't have to be perfect and no one expects you to be, but as a founder, you need to be reasonably competent at sales because you have to see the customer in their environment. You have to understand what their obstacles are, what the benefit of the product is, how they react to certain features and functions, what the return on investment is. Because in the course of these sales calls, people are going to tell you what the benefit is. They're going to tell you, in some cases, in very specific terms, oh, shoot, that saves me, 7 hours a week. And all of a sudden now you can assign a dollar value to each hour. And now an ROI per week, per month, per year for this product. Or you're going to hear those sorts of things. The other thing to keep in mind is, as a founder, if you have any intention of growing the company to be of any significant size, your value inside the company is almost directly proportional as the company scales to your value as a salesperson. Because as the company scales, your sales skills are going to become more valuable over time. You're going to become less of a developer, perhaps. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg does not do any coding for all practical purposes, and neither does Elon, right? These people, they're too busy selling all the time. They're in many cases, Elon Musk is without question the number one salesperson in his company. And so, so was Steve Jobs. And so in any size company that starts to scale, your skills as a salesperson are going to make you valuable to the company going forward. And they're actually going to help keep your longevity in the company. And so if you go out and say you're one of the listeners in here ends up getting funding, and good for you, congratulations, your value to the company is going to become much more important to those investors in your ability to sell than is to develop. Because while you can communicate the direction, the vision for the company in terms of technology, they can hire people to develop. They can't hire people to be you. And the people that want to learn from you as a founder are going to be your customers. And so it's just a critically important time to get at least adequately good at it.
Okay, Brendan, this has been marvelous. You've covered so much ground in a short time. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the feedback, folks. I appreciate your time. I know Brendan does. Brendan's going to stay on the line for a little while. If you have specific questions, feel free to ask him. Unfortunately, and I apologize, I need to go to another meeting. So I'm going to sign off, Brendan, but this has been great.
Yeah, and thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. And if I can figure out, I'll open the chat. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, by all means, or the other alternative, is you can certainly book time with me on at kinetics.com. The website link is here on the screen, and we can book a short call and discuss something in more detail. Otherwise, I know people are going off to other Baltimore Innovation Week talks. And so I'm happy to let you go and enjoy the rest of the day. It's a lovely one. All right. Ed tech. So can you, Bharat, can you provide more detail in terms of, are you looking to find a startup or you are a startup?
No, I am, I am investing in some startups, and, there is a startup in EdTech in the B2B space. So I wanted to just ask a question.
Oh, sure.
You said about Twitter. So they are selling it to school districts, their product. So how would you go about using Twitter in a B2B setting for a EdTech startup which is selling to school districts?
Well, but that's fascinating that you say that, because, it would be as simple as if you could go to, Twitter and search for ed tech, and search on ed tech would be one, or ed tech startup. And then go from there. You could go from there um, to be, school districts, and their Twitter has some really robust search capabilities. And so I would start there and see who's talking about it.
Right.
And then,
Thank you.
I'm sorry. And then the next thing I would do is I would see who's talking about ed tech, and then comment, ask questions of the people in the dialogues in Twitter. This is, by the way, this is equally true in LinkedIn. And then at some point, communicate with those people directly with direct messages. Hey, I'm investing in, hi, I loved your comment about this, or I like what you're doing here, or something like that. I'm investing in ed tech startups and wanted to know if I might be able to talk to you, or I have a question for you. And here's the question, or what do you think about this, or what have you? And then the next step is book a Zoom call. And you'd be surprised how many people, if you approach the conversation in that way, in a very kind of friendly, respectful, inquisitive way, you'd be surprised how many people will respond, and how many conversations you can have in that space, and how quickly you can find the people that are really knowledgeable about it. And so there are VCs that are investing. You could follow them. There's Twitter's an interesting market research and customer acquisition environment these days.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. And Kate, Alicia, do you have any questions for me, or are you here for the next session? In which case I think you're in the wrong room.
No, thank you very much. This was great.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.